Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I see quite a few of you filing in. Hello and welcome. I think we're going to go ahead and get started so that we can turn things over to Dan and Tracy, who are our keynote speakers today, excuse me. But hello again and welcome. I am Nellie Stansbury, Denison Consulting's marketing manager, and I'm super excited to welcome you to today's session in our hybrid innovation series, highlighting in-person and virtual collaboration, hybrid work, innovations from today's VUCA world, and much more. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Dan Denison, Chairman and Founding Partner of Denison Consulting, Margaret Corman, VP of Sales and Marketing at Denison, and our guest speaker, Dr. Tracy Brower, Principal at Research and Consulting Steelcase and a contributor for Forbes and Fast Company. Before I turn things over to Dan and Tracy to get us started, I'd like to encourage you all to utilize the Q&A and chat features below. And if you would be so kind as to share where you're joining us from so we can make sure that they're working, that would be awesome. I'll be monitoring your questions throughout the session and will do my best to answer any quick ones, but I will also be looking throughout the session for questions to pose to our speakers at the end of their discussion during Q&A. I'd like to now introduce Dr. Dan Denison, Denison Consulting's chairman and founding partner. Over the past 25 years, Dan has advanced the field of organizational development and is one of its leading scholars, practitioners, and teachers. Dan's decades-long career as a researcher and professor, first at the University of Michigan's Ross School of Business here in Ann Arbor, and then at the International Institute for Management Development in Switzerland, has produced some of the most impactful work in the fields of organizational culture and leadership behavior today. With that being said, I'm going to turn things over to Dan to introduce Tracy and tell us a little bit more about this series. Thank you all for joining us. We're super excited to have you here.
Thanks, Nellie, and thanks, Margaret, and thanks to all of you for joining us today. We're really excited to be able to welcome Tracy Brower, Dr. Tracy Brower, to speak today on her perspective on the hybrid environment, the return to work, and team engagement. Tracy is really like a fascinating thought leader in our field. She's got a number of great books, but she also has a very, very practical side because her role in Steelcase is helping organizations understand their space needs and how they can support them. So it's a very, very practical role, key to the planning process in many client organizations. So I was really delighted when Tracy agreed that she would join one of our webinar series because the perspective that she has on this whole process, this transition, what works as a hybrid model is quite unique because she always ends up having these really interesting perches here on our field where she can see a lot, learn a lot, and can share a lot. So terrific to have Tracy with us here today. And I'll just turn things over to her so that she can give you some of her perspectives, and then we'll have some dialogue. I'm sure I'll have a question or two in there someplace. But I'm also sure that our audience, as people are rolling in, it's good audience already, please send in your questions on Q&A or on chat, either one. Nellie will help us sort those out, and that'll be the final part of our session today, where we speak to any of the questions that you guys want to raise. So thanks so much to everyone for being here, and over to Tracy to take things away.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. I am just a huge fan of you, Dan, personally, and of Denison Consulting, and actually had the honor of having you part of my first book, Bring Work to Life, and, have been working with Denison Consulting and you personally for so many years. And I just so value your partnership and thought leadership. And it's been so impactful to be able to think about the model of culture that is framework for how we think about organizations and their success. And actually, at Steelcase, when we work with customers, we have a employee experience model, and it includes tools and space, which are critical, but it also includes process and culture, because tools and space are necessary but not sufficient. And so I love your point that we all have a really interesting perch to watch for some of the trends around hybrid work and watch for where we're going. So I'll be really brief with just some early comments and ideas about what we're curious about, what we're hearing. We don't have any of the magical answers, certainly, but definitely have some things that we are learning and things that we're exploring. So one of the places that I always think is so helpful to start is to think about how this will be the most significant reinvention of work in our experience. You know, we've been so fundamentally disrupted, and when the rug is pulled out from under us, we are thinking much more consciously about our work, why we work, what we do, with whom we work, where we work, who we work for. Like, it's just very much part of our consciousness, part of our thinking process that's been brought to the surface. And that is causing a shift in employee expectations. It's causing a shift in implications for leadership. It's causing a shift in the way we think about employee experience and the responsibilities that we have as leaders and organizations. The other thing I think is fascinating is that brilliant economists are starting to say that we have seen a fundamental severing of loyalty to jobs, employers, and regions. Like in other downturns and then in other upturns, you typically see an increase in loyalty toward jobs people are holding fast, or toward employers that don't want to lose anything, or toward regions. But there's been this fundamental severing, a shift in the choices that we're making, a shift in how we prioritize. There was actually a brilliant new study by the Harris Poll. I just did an article on it a couple Sunday evenings ago, and it talked about how there's been this shift in prioritization toward family, toward thinking hard about our careers, toward a desire for experiences, toward friends, toward community. And so that has been something that's worth paying attention to. A CEO I was talking to recently said, you know, the people who left in, you know, the beginning of the pandemic are not the same people who are coming back. And I think we can think about that both literally and figuratively. Like, there's been this great talent revolution, so we literally may not be the same people coming back. But in addition, we've all been changed, shaped, affected by our context and our circumstance. And so we are different people coming back, even figuratively speaking. So I think this is worth mentioning as well. As we talk about hybrid, our popular press tends to put, you know, kind of this false dichotomy in front of us. It's an either or. Home is best. No, office is best. And really, the magic of hybrid is that it is a both and. And there'll be things that we want to do more from home or from remote locations. There'll be things that we want to do in the office. There are reasons that we love working from home or remote locations. There are reasons we love working from the office. And really navigating that both and, navigating those choices is our opportunity, more than it's about some debate about which is better anyway. So I think that's just worth putting out there. So here are some of the trends that we're seeing, and we have tons of data on this. Like, this is kind of like the iceberg, right? I'll give you a couple points, and then there's lots more if you're interested in it. We're finding from our Steelcase data that 89% of leaders are anticipating providing more choice. The other thing that's really interesting is if you look at a range of hybrid options from, hey, everybody can work from home or remote locations from now on, to nope, everybody back every day, there seems to be a trend in the middle. Many and most organizations seem to be in a 3-2 or a 2-3 kind of anticipation. 3 days in the office, 2 someplace else, or vice versa. So that's interesting. The other thing that we're seeing from a trend standpoint is that lots of organizations before the pandemic were kind of on a path toward their renewed, refreshed offices, and almost to a customer, they are pivoting. They're saying, wow, we better shift our direction. And isn't that the business word of the day anyway, right? If you don't say pivot once a day, you may not be in the know in terms of business, right? So we've used our buzzword for the day, but they legitimately are pivoting. They're also doing tons of pilots. Like, gosh, we need to test this. None of us have been in this situation before. Let's make sure we get participation. Let's make sure we experiment. Let's make sure we try some new things in our environment, so we're creating an experience that maintains our culture, that helps us manage cost, that absolutely helps us ensure that we're doing the right thing in terms of our work effectiveness and our customers. So there really is this opportunity for experimentation, for piloting, for trying things out and being really conscious and intentional about the choices that we make for creating that work experience. So I like to put out there some dynamic tensions that are going to come with hybrid. And I like the language of dynamic tension and the concept, because it's like, it doesn't get resolved somehow. Both of these things still exist, and we need to kind of navigate that tension and know that tension exists. And in that tension are opportunities for learning and new approaches. One is this dynamic tension between individual and team and organizational needs. As we give people choices, we need to think about, how do we meet them where they are? How do we give immense respect for the individual? How do we elevate work life? How do we elevate choice on the part of individuals and their particular needs? And we need to make sure that we're still attending to the needs of teams and teams and organizations, and not just what I need as an individual, but what does my team need, and how is our work done best for each of those kinds of needs? I think the other thing that is a dynamic tension is thinking about long-term and short-term. You know, when we get back, we might need something in the short term, but then we need to be ready to evolve, intentional about our learning and our measurements, so we can think about an employee experience that evolves over time. And so we set the expectation that that evolution will be happening, not because we got it wrong at the beginning, but because we're smart people who learn on an ongoing basis. The other thing I think is a dynamic tension is between choice and expectation. We want to give people choice. Steelcase research suggests that when people have more choice and control, they're significantly more engaged. And it's really healthy that we hold people accountable, that organizations set expectations. We all have an instinct to matter. We want to know that our work is being counted on by somebody. We want to be held accountable. And so that is a dynamic tension as well, between giving enough choice and holding people accountable in appropriate ways for where they show up and when they show up and how their work gets done, and that their work gets done to a level of quality. And that's really fair as employers. And this is going to be a surprise for Dan and the Denison team. I added this last minute. Another dynamic tension is between intimacy and distance. We had the funniest experience in our May session together. Our little dog Truffle is the quietest little dog. She never makes a peep. And I was home alone and we were doing this session, and she started barking uncontrollably while I was talking. And so I had to literally stop and get up and deal with that. So we said, hey, bark if you love Denison. But I think there is a bigger picture to that story. Exactly. There's a bigger picture to that story, and a bigger picture beyond Truffle. It is this idea of intimacy and distance. You know, like, distance can be extraordinarily detrimental. We lose social capital, or we spend social capital staying connected. We potentially lose a sense of proximity. We potentially are challenged with not feeling that same line of sight to our work or to our colleagues or to our cultures. So that is part of it. But also we get this new intimacy, right? We see a child on someone's lap. We, see them in their baseball cap. We hear their dog barking. And so those kinds of intimacies tend to build trust. And I think this is another dynamic tension as we think about hybrid, this intimacy that we develop, and then this interesting challenge in terms of distance. So there we go. There's your surprise for the day, Dan, with a visit from Truffle.
I love it.
So the other thing I just want to say quickly is all about fairness there's a brilliant sociological study that was done across 60 countries and societies, which found that fairness is a fundamental human need. And we know if people don't feel like they have a sense of fairness, there really is fairness, and we perceive fairness, they'll be less likely to stick around at an organization. And so fairness will be fundamental to our hybrid choices. How do we make sure that we're not setting up a have-not system? And I think it has to do with setting principles for the decision-making and for our values. I think it has to do with transparency. When we make choices about who gets to work where, when, we're transparent about those. We elevate the work as a choice-making criteria more than like position or title. And we build strong cultures and relationships among teams and leaders. When we have that stronger level of trust and connectedness, then we tend to perceive more positivity anyway. And then I think this is relevant as well. We've done some amazing research about what will bring people back. And it has to do with feeling connected with others and having space that connects us. It has to do with leadership presence and accessibility, that desire to rub elbows with leaders. Little did we know that old-fashioned phrase would be so relevant today. And it has to do with stimulation and inspiration. We love the cocoons that we've developed. We love our fuzzy slippers sitting, in our home offices, but our worlds have gotten small and people are craving for stimulation and inspiration and all that we can inspire in each other when we have great experiences and places to do that. So place can provide for those kinds of things: variety and connection, a sense of purpose, a sense of territory and predictability. If we have a neighborhood within which we can work, or a place to put our stuff for the day, even if organizations are shifting toward more collaborative space, they still need to meet needs for things like focus and learning and rejuvenation and socialization. So there are lots of ways that we can have this both and experience of working remotely, working from home, and working from an office together. So with that, let me come back to kind of Denison and Dan and Nellie and the conversation that we will have. So thank you so much for letting me put a few thoughts out there to begin with.
Fantastic. And yeah, if we could back up a page so that we're not like, showing workshops and all that. This is a good one for discussion. And thank you so much, Tracy. Always like a different perspective, always very inspiring. And, this places meet needs. I think that's pretty profound. And, anything that you can share, and I know there's limits to what you can talk about, but any of the organizations that you have worked with or Steelcase has worked with that you think have, how did they come to the recognition that places meet needs? And what are some of the innovative things that you've seen that we can all learn from? We can start our dialogue there.
Yeah, I love that. That's great. I think the way that we know that place matters is from all of our research and from all of the anecdotal information that we get from customers. We've done no less than 11 separate studies. We've touched no less than 52,000 people across 11 countries and asked them, what do you love about working from home? What do you not so much love about working away from the office? What do you need in the office? What are the things that will bring you back? What are you challenged with in multiple places? And we know that place matters to people in terms of some shifting expectations. They want safety. They want both psychological safety and literal safety. They want a sense of belonging. They want a sense of productivity because, some of us can be awesomely productive at home and others not so much because their home situation doesn't necessarily support that. They want comfort and they want control. Those are some of the new expectations. So that's some of what we know. I think some of what we're starting to see in terms of innovative approaches is organizations that are really focusing on what we call social hubs. Like, how might you take a work cafe and give people the opportunity to be alone together. You know, like a work cafe doesn't just have to be a place to collaborate or connect serendipitously. It can be a place where I'm doing focused work, but I'm with others. I feel like I'm together with others. And that's a big reason that people want to be in the office. And so we can create that. We even have organizations that have incorporated approaches where like they'll have office hours. So like we can come together in a social hub or a work cafe at certain hours. Neighborhoods are extraordinarily useful because what neighborhoods do is provide you predictability and territory as an individual. Like I know where I'm going to go each day, and I may not sit at a particular workstation, but there may be some shared workstations in our neighborhood. And that also gives me a sense of territory, and it gives me efficiency. I know where to find you during the day. You know where to find me. And it gives flexibility in terms of the surges or the ebbs in terms of when people are in the office. It gives flexibility in terms of cost from a real estate perspective. So those are a couple things that we're seeing that are innovative on the parts of customers.
It's a profound change because the office is it's declining as a place to work on our own. But it maybe is, ascending in terms of a place to meet.
Yes.
And offices are becoming a little more like conference centers and a little less like cubes. You can do your cube work alone at home, but coordinating so that when you come into the office, that the other people there that you need to collaborate with that give you that sense of community are also there. That's hard for organizations to do. How do you set a policy? Because one of the things that we see in our research is that the reaction at the top is to try to create a policy. And I like the way that you said it's either 2-3 or 3-2, and we're not really sure, but it doesn't make that much difference. Let's go. It's kind of a half and half world. That's really good. Policy question solved, but what does that actually mean? Because as you get to the working level of an organization, and the message there is they want flexibility. And how do those two things come? How do you create a policy or a structure, an office structure that drives the flexibility that we need?
Yeah, I think that's the question of the moment, right? And I think when we see companies doing it really well from a policy standpoint, they've been able to find this middle ground between giving choice and flexibility and setting expectations for when people will be in the office. Like we've seen some companies say, oh, everybody just choose for yourselves, or leaders, departments, you just choose for yourselves. The challenge with that is if my work is adjacent to another group's work or another person's work, I may have trouble connecting with them. On the other hand, we've seen customers say, oh, it's going to be all this, it's always going to be Tuesday through Thursday from 10 a.m. on Tuesday to 3 p.m. on Thursday. And, I think some of the customers that seem to be walking that middle ground a little more are saying, we're going to have some principles that are going to guide us at a corporate level. And then leaders are going to make decisions for their departments within those guidelines. And then individuals may have, different choices they get to make based on their work. And I think one of the things that's really interesting to consider is how we have cultures that aren't so rules-based that people feel limited by it. They still get enough flexibility that they feel like grown-ups with autonomy, right? And I think part of what's so helpful, two things. One, when organizations and teams and individuals can increase the transparency, the norm of transparency around schedule. Because if I'm going to make my commute into the office, I want to do it when Dan and Margaret and Nellie are there, right? And so there's some transparency in our schedule and openness. But I have an appointment on, Thursday afternoon that you all don't need to know about. So we still get privacy. We've got to figure out that norm for transparency. I think that's one. And then I think another one is the idea of being incredibly intentional about our work and how our work happens as teams. And that's going to take the investment of some time and conscious effort, kind of on an ongoing basis. Some work we might be able to do brilliantly when we're all remote, and it's best if we're all on screen. Some
Yes.
work we might be able to do best if we're all in person together, if we can be, right? And other work is fine if it's hybrid. Some of us are in the office, some of us aren't. And I think that different work at different ebbs and flows in the project cycle will lend itself differently to those situations. And the more intentional we can be about talking to each other about that, right? Like, hey, we've got this big meeting and we really need this like brain trust, and let's all try to be in the office together, right? Like those kinds of discussions about when we're going to be together face to face, when we're going to be hybrid, when we're going to be all remote, I think are another part of navigating that rule versus flexibility challenge that we're going to be looking at.
It's really amazing to watch the ups and downs of sort of rule-based logic for leading and management organizations, because it's really taken a dive, I think, with this issue, because once you get a rules-based policy articulated for the first 3 levels, and then it's okay, well, how about the next 6? With these 17 contingencies, you don't get halfway, into that forest before it changes. What we were all talking about in June, I don't know about you, but I made a bunch of plans in May and June that were based on a great opening up that sort of lasted about 6 weeks and then closed back down. But the rules-based logic really has its limits, and it means that we've got to rely on people's judgment around some principles that they use, because flexibility policies are, how do you create a policy of flexibility that will satisfy both the people usually at the top of the organization, who have a lot on their plate, a big obligation to make decisions and get it right. And I can imagine a lot of CEOs going back to their board saying, well, we've decided that we'll have a policy of flexibility, and the board members kind of scratch their head and say, next, who else you got? But that's, in a way, that's exactly what is needed.
Yeah. And I love your phrase about, the rules for flexibility. It's like an oxymoron, right? It's just kind of.
Yes, exactly.
And so I think it's about having principles that will guide our decisions, our choices, and transparency about how we're applying those. I think the other thing to consider is, like from a neuroscientific perspective, we prefer clarity. We shy away from ambiguity and unpredictability. Yeah. We humans want to know what to expect, which is part of what's going to help people to feel more comfortable coming back to the office, the more clear we can be. But I think that has a lot to do with clarity on those principles as well. And the other thing I think we need to do is, our other human condition is that whatever we see in front of us, we tend to kind of think it's static, right? Like,
yes.
I came back to the office, there was this policy, this is what I'm going to count on, this is the way it is, right? But we know there's so much more fluidity in life in general, and in particular during this time, that I think we can benefit if we set an expectation that this will evolve over time. Like to your point, what I knew in May caused me to plan my vacation in June, and then everything changed again. And so I think that there is this, like, letting people know that we're doing this because it's the decision we've made based on the best information we have. But we also have a culture of learning, and we have a culture of responsiveness. So as we learn more, we will adjust, we will adapt. And so I think that that super clarity about an expectation for adjusting and adapting is also really important. And it speaks to that need that we all have for plenty of clarity. I think it's also this really interesting time when companies have become quote unquote, a single source of truth. You know, like with so much information coming at us, we've seen this trend where people are turning to their companies, to their leaders to say, okay, like, how do I make sense of this? How does this matter to our business, to our industry? How does this matter to me? And so I think leaders also have this super important job to stay present, to stay accessible, literally and figuratively, sharing information so that as things do change, we know what we can count on. We know what those guidelines or principles are, and we know what we can expect from our employer, from our culture, from our work experience. I don't know if that makes any sense to you, Dan, if you would express that any differently, given your experience.
No, it makes lots of sense. I really appreciate it. As we look at the different, age employees and organization members, in the work that you've done in Steelcase, again, not prying beyond what you want to, reveal, what do you find out, especially when we look at millennials? Is it more important to be appealing to their needs for clarity and stability, or flexibility and independence? And the answer is yes, but interested in what you've seen there in terms of the different range of age of the people that have been in your studies.
Yeah, that's been really, really interesting. Like what we've seen is that lots of different generations have a desire for both hybrid work and for work in the office, but often for different reasons. Like one of the things we found about more senior generations is that in some cases they've had an easier time over the last couple of years because they have more social capital built up. Right? Like if we think about social capital as a bank balance, we make deposits when we're face to face, we're building relationships, we're building trust, we're just getting to figure people out because we're around them. And we have long-term relationships with them potentially if we're more senior. So that bank balance has been higher for them, whereas you tend to make withdrawals when you're farther away, when you don't have that proximity. So one of the things we've seen is that more senior generations have had an easier time because they've generally had or reported they've had greater bank balances of social capital. In addition, we've seen that they've had an easier time because a lot of times they're in a life stage where they just have an easier, home experience, right? They don't have small children running around. Maybe they're empty nesters or their kids are older. They probably they maybe have a more dedicated home office. They have, maybe they've gotten to the point that they've got, I don't know, a bigger home that affords them an opportunity to have kind of that working space at home. As we look at kind of the millennial generation, what we see is that there have been more people who have struggled with, oh my gosh, I've got to wear more hats. I'm facilitating learning, or I've got small children at home, or my childcare isn't what it used to be, or I can't count on the bus schedule anymore because it changes based on the availability of drivers. I was literally just talking to a mom who said that last night. And so that millennial generation is looking to their employer and to their workplace as a point for productivity, because they may not be able to be as productive at home. They may be more distracted. As we look at the youngest generations, the younger end of millennials and then Gen Zs, what we hear from them is, oh my gosh, I really want to be close to my coworkers. I want to build my social capital. I want to have visibility. I want to know that I'm on the radar screen. And the best organizations are saying, hey, it doesn't matter where you work. We value your work. We're going to pay attention to you in terms of promotions and succession planning. But we also know kind of the human nature of being present together and building credibility and rapport when we're present. So we're seeing this really interesting desire on the parts of all generations to come back to the office for certain reasons. and for all generations to be appreciating their increased choices on remote work. Like, hey, I can work out more, or I can spend more time with my family, or I get to, go straight to my volunteer activity at 5:05 and not have my commute in between. And that has been true of multiple generations. So I think that question is so important and relevant to us to think about life stage almost as a proxy for age or generation, and how our life
Yes.
stage is supported differently based on where we're working and the choices that we get to make.
That's great.